Hi there, welcome back to the Apatros review. In this episode, the second half of the D Spectrum Part 2. Welcome back. This is the second part of a two-part special I've made to mark the 50th episode of the Apatros review. Now I'll review the 50th episode tomorrow, which covers all the worst films I've reviewed so far in the show. Well, so far between this and the original D Spectrum. If you don't know what the format of this special is, well, for each film on this list, I'll mention which episode I covered it in, give it a brief synopsis, and review and explain my reasons for my grading, as well as briefly explain what DVD it was released on, if applicable. So here goes. Now, for this first one reviewing, Star Hunter, directed by Colin McKay and Fred Olen Ray, 1995. I covered this in episode 37, and I gave it a D+, which is a 3 out of 10. An El Cheapo blend of the awesome sci-fi action horror classic Predator, my ultimate favorite film, and your standard 1980s slasher flick, only this one was made in the mid-1990s. Star Hunter has a group of high school students and their coach trapped within a city block of dilapidated buildings by an invisible force field, all the while being chased by a blind robot that hunts by sonar waves, so basically it sees by sound, and uses a shotgun, a perfect weapon for blind people, trust me. A decent concept for a cheapest chips C-grade sci-fi horror flick. Well, the execution isn't really that great, which warrants a D+. Still, it's not a terrible film, and fans of Fred Olen Ray will find this something of a decent time killer, while the rest of us should keep our distance unless interested. It is available on DVD, both in flashback entertainment and multimedia, to bargain basement DVD labels during the 2000s. Have issued this one cheap $2 DVDs, easy to find if you know where to look. Now, Monster, directed by Herbert L. Strock and Kenneth Hartford, 1979. I reviewed this in episode 38 and I gave it a D-, which is a 1 out of 10. This is the worst piece of shit I've ever worked on, and I've worked on a lot of pieces of shit. So goes the opinion of John Carradine, one of the most prolific B-grade actors of all time, and who had built up a reputation of starring some total hitser in search of a paycheck. Carradine stars here as a pretty useless priest in a small Colombian town being menaced by a monster that likes to eat the local skinny dippers. The company that owns the local cement plant sends this troubleshooter to do a Sheriff Brody in the quality bastard, which he does with a cheap carcass loaded with old explosives. Kaboom. The film is one of the worst films to ever come out in the 1970s, and it's so fucking boring that you'll be checking your watch almost every single minute. Oh, and the poor quality of the DVD review print means that things are pretty hard to make out. There's a scene featuring nudity, but the bad quality makes the skinny dipper's body impossible to see clearly. Now, this was released on a number of public domain labels on VHS and DVD. The highest profile release this film has had is on the Mill Creek 50 film box set Pure Terror. Now, Robocop III, directed by Fred Decker in the year 1993. I reviewed this in episode 40. I'll give this one a D+, which is a 3 out of 10. I'm a Robocop fan from way back. In the very late 1980s, as I was living in Yugoslavia, my father sent me VHS tapes of the Rambo films and Robocop, and I used to watch them practically every day. And building up my skills with family VCRs, I learned how to master the slow-mo button and the remote. I almost wore out those tapes. I didn't get another copy until 2002 when I bought the DVD. I originally saw Robocop 2 on my uncle's bootleg videotapes, along with several other films that I'll review as time goes on. So you can probably see that I'm a die-hard Robocop fan. Yet, I didn't hate Robocop 3 with the same passion that fans normally reserve for something like the infamous 30th anniversary edition Night of the Living Dead. I was quite disappointed in it, although not to the extent that most other fans were. Indeed, the critical mourning that Robocop 3 endured gave it an unenviable reputation as one of the worst sequels ever made. I actually see that the film, for all its mistakes and making old Robo so weak that even the 40mm rifle grenade poses a severe threat to him, even though he went for like 10 times the damage in the first two films, or the utterly useless Automa android ninjas, who seem to have an addiction to cigarettes, although they might be programmed into them to make them more badassery. Nice try, Decker, it didn't work. It also seemed to be able to be hacked by a young girl with a children's grade laptop, or the unholy side of Robocop driving a pink pimpmobile that seems to have been modified to survive massive amounts of ammunition. Is this what inspired the makers of the stupid Grand Theft Auto games? Or the irritating buffoonery of Rip Torn as the CEO of OCP? Robocop 3 was at least made in the same spirit that the franchise was built on, or full of a kid-friendly feel. In my mind, this ain't a terrible film, only a mediocre one at best, suited for entertaining young children. If you're a fan of the original film and want to share your love to the franchise to your kids, then Robocop 3 is a pretty good pick for the first screening of your little ones. Although you might need to keep an eye on them as action scenes do come in mild since the friend and key characters in the franchise get killed. Like I said, I don't hate the film. It's bad, but it's not terrible. I mean, like every film, I guess every film in the history of cinema has its fans. Now, the DVD for Robocop 3 was put out by MGM, or issued as part of the Robocop trilogy box set. Originally in a box of 3 separate cases matching standard sleeves, then reissued in a similar package a decade later, although with different packaging to the original set. It should be noted that Robocop 3 has never seen a standalone release. Now, happy birthday to me. Kind of ironic since it's my birthday tomorrow. J. Lee Thompson, 1981. I covered this one in episode 42. I gave this one a D+, which is a 3 out of 10. One of the now legendary first wave early 1980s slasher films that came out right after the success of both Halloween, the undisputed champion of the genre, and Friday the 13th. Happy Birthday to Me was one of the 2 Canadian slashers, that being My Bloody Valentine, to enter the genre at the time, and despite being greeted with a rather frosty reception from critics, has developed something of a cult following the decades since its release. It is interesting to note that the film stars Melissa Sue Anderson, who was a rising young star on the then popular TV show Little House on the Prairie. I used to watch that show on TV during the early 1990s, and who took time off from that show to star in this film. And in the director's chair, J. Lee Thompson, the master of various 1970s adventure films and director of the original Cape Fear. His presence in this film would, in a theoretical sense, should turn this film into one of the greatest slashers of all time, even being a Halloween. Notice how I said theoretical. A dull as shit story concerns a high school senior who has been having blackouts with her friends and being murdered in semi-creative ways by somebody close to her who has a serious axe to grind with her. I won't spoil the ending here, mainly because it's so ridiculous. Now, this film was originally released on DVD in Australia through Columbia TriStar Home Entertainment. In a modified version, they removed the creepy instrumental musical score from the opening credits and replaced it with a cheesy disco song, as well as replacing other musical cues throughout the film. This version was released throughout the world and pissed off a good many fans. The atrocious new cover design added to the misery. Since then, Anchor Bay has put out the original version, while here in Australia, Shock Entertainment issued the original version for their Cinema Cult range of DVDs. Alone in the Dark, Uwe Boll, 2004. I covered this one in episode 44. I gave it a D+, 3 out of 10. After this video game adaptation, House of the Dead ignited the ire of the internet's film critics and earned them the title Worst Director Ever, thanks to the many liberties he took with the House of the Dead video game franchise. I thought, to be fair, the original game was simply run and gunner, while the film had slightly more plot to it and was slick enough to make itself look like a proper adaptation should, despite the poor plotting and ridiculous concept. Boll had his own way of countering criticism. He simply went back to work. Alone in the Dark was the second video game adaptation Boll made, and it was even worse than House of the Dead. Although the film still made money in international release and kept Boll going as the Grim Reaper of video game franchises. Alone in the Dark is pretty moronically cliched from first glance, with a plot that throws in everything from monsters that exist in darkness, which can only be killed by light-producing weaponry, parasite implantation and parasite-controlled zombies, characters with ridiculous names like Carnby and Cedric, which seem like the sort of names you associate with old-fashioned British aristocrats in the early 20th century, slick but ultimately soulless action scenes, the post-millennial reliance on CGI overkill, and storytelling that resembles the sort of storytelling you expect from the Resident Evil series, although without the dogged determination those films were renowned for, and a climax that seems like a cheap excuse to leave the door open to sequels. Speaking of which, one did follow a couple years later with Rick Ewan playing Carby, and having him going up against Undead Boy Jack and Witch, which is better than the original but still not getting anywhere above mediocre. Also, if you watch the original version, there are some plot holes in the story that reduce the effectiveness of the story. Bold noticed this and released a director's cut years later that inserts some deleted scenes, which explains away some of the film's playing dead ends, although not raising the film's quality. Now, this near Junker was originally released in Australia by Eagle Entertainment, a former VHS label during the 1990s, which managed to successfully transition to DVDs and then to Blu-rays as well, although initially as rental-only titles. The Eagle disc contained the theatrical version and had some pretty decent picture and sound quality. While the original version was rental-only, the film's director's cut was issued years later from 20th Century Fox, first as a rental-only title, like the Eagle disc, but then dumped to bargain basement store DVD bins by Palace Entertainment. That was a reasonably cheap $5 disc, although the disc Palace issue was structurally identical to the Fox disc. This this director's cut version has a few extra scenes in it to add to the exposition, but in order to streamline the film for new footage, the ridiculous sex scene halfway through when nobody takes their clothes off during the act was omitted. Still, it's at least a minute and a half longer than the original version. If you're a fan of this flick and can track down both versions, then all the power to you. Now, Caved In, directed by Richard Pepin in 2006. Covered this one in episode 47. Gave this one a D+, which is a 3 out of 10. Top-notch adventurer John Palmer and his wife and 2 teenage children, who also make up his professional team members, get more than they bargained for when they postpone their holiday to Greece to guide a team of Eurotrash gangsters into an abandoned salt mine in order to locate a rumored stash of massive emeralds hidden inside the mine's lower levels. But what they don't realize is that there's a hive of giant killer beetles also living inside the mine, creating the mines known as ambush, kill, and devour anyone foolish to dare venture into their domain. Now, this was the last film that 1990's cult direct-to-video science fiction action director Richard Pepper ever made, having decided after making Caved In to seemingly retire from the filmmaking game. As it stands, Caved In is a pretty mediocre horror film, with unconvincing CGI effects and cheap gore, although this was the goriest film Pepper ever made, and a daft concept. A sorry end to Pepper's once illustrious genre career. Now, this was one of the last releases from Ninth Dimension, which was a short-lived budget label that popped up around 2004 and issued a single large bunch of budget DVDs for the price of about $10 and vanished from the market after a couple of years, although the last release was seen around 2007 or so, were co-issued by Sony Pictures a real DVD. Now, last one for the episode, Bloodsport, the Dark Comité, directed by Elvis Rosteno in the year 1998. This was in episode 49. I gave this one a D, which is a 2 out of 10. The original Bloodsport was an interesting cult hit from the late 1980s, that propelled actor Jean-Claude Van Damme to stardom and relaunched the martial arts genre by modernizing it apart from the countless Asian-supplied cheesy, chop-sucking martial arts B-craze that had been flooding the drive-ins and grindhouse cinemas of the previous couple of decades. It was still as cheesy as those earlier films, but at least gave a more plausible and thus more relatable context to the genre. Van Damme went on to make a string of other cult favorite martial arts thrills like Kickboxer, Lionheart, and the Albert Plain thermonuclear cheese explosion of the post-apocalyptic thriller Cyborg, while the Bloodsport franchise only spun on about 3 diminishing sequels, of which this one's the last. Now, while the original film was a bona fide cult classic and the first 2 sequels were surprisingly reasonable for their time, this 1998 effort, the sole directorial outing for director Elvis Rosteno, who also has an acting role as a bugged-out doctor, is a complete waste of time for Bloodsport fans and casual martial arts fans. But there are some who might want to check this out for curiosity's sake. But the only real appeal this film has is for the bad movie cult, since it, while not exactly being terrible, does have a good deal of what the fuckery thrown in to provide some amusement. Plenty of superfluous zooming and motion shots that will cause a weak-willed viewer to have motion sickness, although there's none of that dreaded shaky cam bullshit, thank goodness for that small mercy, and some appalling acting, particularly the 35-second role of the judge who sentences the hero to jail, actor glass-munching his way for those 35 seconds and giving hardcore bad movie fans a good laugh, and almost some killer heckling if they're up to the challenge. The prison scenes were shot at a real prison, completely real convicts acting as extras. Like I mentioned in the episode, I'd love to know how the security arrangements are pulled off, because that's pretty dicey as far as these films go. Now, the film is bad, and I mean really fucking bad. But, like I explained, this is not entirely terrible, so it avoids the D- rating and instead rests easy on the D, which is a 2 out of 10. If you're a bad movie fan, this will be pretty sweet to watch. It also should be important to get this Australian DVD release from JL Entertainment, since, unlike the British DVD release, this one is cheap and uncut. Now, like I said, this is one of the early releases from JL Entertainment, a label that appeared in the early 2000s, putting out skeleton discs available on grey market DVD sales at that period. Later JL releases bootleg duplicates of foreign discs, with their original versions region coding removed. Picture quality is pretty decent, given this is simply an operated VHS print, although shadow detail is a little lacking and the clarity is not perfect, with mild issues with the resolution, although the VHS nature of the original print factors into the equation. The soundtrack is standard bitrate stereo and sounds well enough. There are no subtitles and the disc has no supplement. I will for the final time mention that this list is of the uncut version, showing the climactic pen and ear stabbing climax and all its glory. So that's it, the 13 worst films I covered this year so far. I will do more of these specials as time goes on, one every 25 regular episodes. I have plenty more films to go, so keep watching, dear fans. That's it for this review.